In this video, we're going to be going over the BPRE compliance packet. So these are all the documents in the compliance packet. So we've got the lead-based paint pamphlet. That only applies if the property falls under the lead-based paint. So that's where RF209, the lead-based paint disclosure, comes in. We've got the disclaimer notice, wire fraud warning, the importance of inspection and property survey. We have our Bridgepoint affiliated business arrangement, and we have our Bridgepoint media release form. And then we've got the confirmation of agency, which we added from the MLS. We have the lead-based paint disclosure, which we added from the MLS. We have the property condition disclosure, which we added from the MLS. Let's take a look at each one of these forms. So the lead-based paint pamphlet just kind of explains the EPA and what lead-based paint is, how it can be harmful. It's just a good information pamphlet about lead-based paint. And at the very end of that, we've got a couple of signature boxes that have been added. The next form is the disclaimer notice. And let me reduce the size of this a little bit. So essentially what the disclaimer notice does is it explains to your client that you are a professional real estate agent. So you're knowledgeable on a real estate transaction. You can help them complete the forms, but you are not a home inspector. You can't tell them about the condition of the roof. You can't tell them about wood destroying insects, environmental hazards. You can't even tell them the square footage because you're not licensed for that. That has to be done by a professional who is licensed for each one of these. So that's what this is kind of just explaining. Especially when it comes to like legal and tax advice. So real estate right here, real estate licensees are not legal or tax experts and therefore cannot advise you in these areas. So anytime that they're uncertain, we have to advise them to talk to seek legal guidance. But we can help them, complete forms, help them through the process of a real estate transaction. This is a very important document that you always want to get completed, whether you're working with buyers or sellers, because this gets you out of a lot of legal trouble. The next form is the wire fraud warning. So it's basically explaining that, scammers will typically send an email that appears to be from your agent, broker, lender, or closing attorney, closing agency. So basically just explains that we will never have them wire Bridgepoint any money. And if they receive anything about wiring money, they should contact that institution that is requesting the wire transfer before they actually go through that process. The one thing you do want to remind them is that it is possible to wire transfer money to the title company. And when they receive those wiring instructions from the title company, it's always a good idea to contact that title company and confirm that that wire transfer was requested by them and that it's going to the correct account. The next form is the importance of inspections and property survey. This form is one that we always recommend you complete. And honestly, it's usually better for you to kind of help them complete this form because you want to have all these different discussions with them. So, with the importance of inspections, it explains why your buyer should get a home inspection. And it kind of explains how appraisals are different from home inspections. So, the first section is just kind of explaining why they should get all these different inspections. The next section, starting at line 62, is the buyer acknowledgement. And this is where it's a good idea to have the conversation beforehand to find out exactly what inspections your buyer wants to have. We always strongly recommend a home inspection and a wood destroying insect inspection. The survey is not always necessary, and the radon gas is not always necessary. So, those are two that we typically don't have, but it's a good idea to have those discussions with them of why it's important to get them and let them make that decision on their own. The reason why this form is so important is that if they decide not to have a specific type of inspection, this is basically them saying that they do not want to have those inspections. If they want to have the inspection, that's great, and we still need to complete this form, but it's really a protection against you when they don't want to have that inspection. That way, they can't come back and say, hey, our agent recommended we didn't have this. We wanted to get a home inspection all along, but if you've got this form completed and they've checked that they don't want to have that inspection and they've signed it, that's written evidence that they never wanted to have that inspection. So this is, I like to refer to this as kind of your get out of jail free card. The next form in the compliance packet is one that is also very important, and that is our affiliated business arrangement disclosure. So our owner, Corey, has part ownership in closed title. And we also have partnerships with Ben Miller with Barrett Financial, Heron Mountain Homes, and Johnson City Insurance. So, because of those partnerships, if your buyer chooses to work with any of these individuals or companies, we have to disclose that. The Bridgepoint Media Release Form covers several different areas. The main thing it does is it allows us to use our client's name, image, likeness, voice, appearance, and their property in any kind of marketing we choose to do. So, for example, if your client gives you a review, it allows us to promote that review on our social media platforms. Also, in the event that they want to give us a video testimony, same thing. Or if we're, you know, doing a property walkthrough video, it allows us to use that content for our social media purposes. It also has a section in here this is more for the listing side, but sometimes I'll go out and do photography, videography, and we use drone footage. So it kind of protects the brokerage against any liability if something should happen with the drone or any participant recording video. So it's just kind of a legal protection in that sense. The next forms that we get into are the ones that we pulled from the MLS. So when you download the confirmation of agency, part of it should already be completed by the listing agent. So all the seller side information should be completed. From the buyer representation agreement, you will want to complete the buyer side with the buyer name, licensee, and you're going to want to check this box here. We always recommend being the designated agent for the buyer on all transactions. The only time that you would use something other than designated agent for the buyer is if you are the listing agent and you're going to be representing both sides. So there's two ways you can do that. And that is if you're the designated agent for the seller, basically got two options. You can either do the buyer is unrepresented, which means that you will not be negotiating on behalf of the buyer. You'll just basically be completing the paperwork that is required based on what they tell you to put in that paperwork. The other one is disclosed dual agent for both parties. But that requires that the seller agrees to that dual agency disclosure, and there is another form that you would need to complete for the dual agency. The next document is the lead-based paint disclosure, and this only applies to properties constructed prior to 1978. Most of the time, this box here will be checked, acknowledging that the seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in the house. So the main thing you will need to complete on the buyer side is lines 26 through 39. So it's either going to be buyer has received copies of all records and reports pertaining to lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the house, or they've not received any records and reports regarding lead-based paint or the paint hazards in the house. They will need to initial this box here, and this is referring to that lead-based paint pamphlet that was the very first document in the compliance packet. Then you get into the contingency portion of it, which is, do the buyers want to have an inspection for lead-based paint? Honestly, most of the time, you're going to be using this box here, 38. Buyer waives the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint. And then we've got this. This is for the licensee, you. Buyer's agent has informed seller of the seller's obligation and is aware his or her responsibility to ensure compliance. And notice this, only required if the buyer's agent receives compensation from the seller, but it's always a good idea to go ahead and initial this box. And then we have the signature. So you've got where the buyer signs, and then you also have a signature box for the real estate licensee for the buyer. And then you have this for information purposes only. You've got the listing side for the sellers, and then you have the selling company, which is the buy side. And then the final document is the Tennessee Residential Property Condition Disclosure. If the seller has not lived in the property for more than 3 years, then you could see a property condition exemption. But most of the time, you'll see a property condition disclosure. This document will have everything about the property that the seller has disclosed. And it's a pretty long document, but the main meat of it is down here starting at line 71. This is where they start to disclose what items the property has and if there's any defects to those items. So you should have already had this when you went on the showing, and always go over this document carefully with your buyer before you proceed to making an offer. And that is the compliance packet. We'll save and close. So once you've prepared all these documents, so the ones that you download from the MLS, you will have to go in and add the signature boxes and the text fields and check boxes because those will not auto populate because that's a raw PDF that you've downloaded and uploaded into the system. All the other documents in the compliance packet will already have those text boxes and signature fields already populated. And then you'll want to send this compliance packet and get it signed before you proceed to the purchase and sale agreement.